But there's a problem, and it's kind of an important one. Are these results practically significant? Are they of great importance in real life? IRL, right? So we proved that it's statistically significant, no problem. Right? We rejected H naught. If you reject H naught, that's statistically significant. But does that mean that it had great practical significance? Well, let's look. We said mu 0 was 64.5, right? And then we came up with an X bar of 64.28. So we proved that that is statistically significant, but look at it. They're not that far apart, right? So I would say, is this of great practical significance? No, right? So no, not of great practical significance because because 64.28 is so close, is just a little bit below 64.5. It might be statistically significant, but that doesn't mean like all of a sudden ICUs are vastly different than they were before, right? So in 2000, they were 64.5. They are now 64.28. Congratulations, you've gone down by like zero point 0.2 of a year. What difference does this make? And the answer is it doesn't, right? This is not of great practical significance. Practical significance means in real life, does this really change how you're going to run your ICU? No, right? So our ICU will run the same way, the same now as it did in 2000. So it's not of great practical significance because you're not really changing how you're doing things. Which means we're not always finding things that are practically significant. They're actually not the same thing. And that's a very important key understanding to make. When a result has a small p-value, we say that that is statistically significant, right? So when you have a small p-value, when your p-value is low, you reject H naught, and that is statistically significant. But that does not mean that what you came up with is important, right? That does not mean your result is going to change how you do things, right? It might, but it might not. So when a result is statistically significant, we can only conclude that the true value of the parameter differs from the value of H0 in this way specified. So 64.28 is lower than 64.5. We proved that. So when it's statistically significant, that means you get to reject H naught. That's what it means. But that doesn't mean, right, you cannot conclude that that result is important, because that may or may not be the case. It could be the case, but it might not be, right? So we cannot conclude that the result is of great practical significance, right? That it's important. And one of the ways to look at that is the difference, right? So if we think about the one we just did, mu 0 take away x bar, you want to look at those differences and say, hey, was that a big amount or a little bit amount? Right? 64.5 take away 64.28 is like 0.22. It's not much at all, right? And similarly, you can do the same thing for proportions. You can take p0 minus p hat and see, is it big, right? Here, I'll give you two options. If it's big or is it small, right? So if it's a big difference, then that would maybe be important, right? Actually, let me erase this one real quick. Let me just write this here. So if it's a big difference, if it's a large difference, oh, sorry, right? If it's a large difference, then that implies that maybe there's some important results going on. And if it's a small difference, I should have written that above the line. I'm sorry. So if it's a small difference, then that might not be much of anything going on, right? So if it's a small difference, then that's probably not that important. Probably. It depends on the context. So small difference, probably not important, but not necessarily. Right? And important, by that I mean practically significant. Practically means in practice. And you can do this for the difference in means. You can also do it for p minus p hat. Same thing. Right? It'll be the same idea. Is there a big difference or not, relatively speaking? All right. So I apologize for mixing up that box so much, but this is really important, right? Even though this is just a rule of thumb, this is not set in stone, right? This is just a rule of thumb that we're looking at. But context matters. Context is actually more important than this. So you might think, oh, a small difference is not that important. What if it's that small difference is the percentage of survival for infants in a surgery? Well, then every little percent means another baby gets to live, right? So therefore, the small difference would be important. See, it depends on context. So practical significance, let me write this. Practical significance is a judgment call. Based on the context of the situation. There's no hard and fast answer for when things are significant and when they're not. I'm giving you a little rule of thumb here, but even that's not perfect. Because there are instances where even small differences matter a lot. Epidemiology, for example. Suppose we found a COVID-19 treatment that helps just like a small percentage of people that have it, but that small percentage of people then is getting to survive, right? Or we found a new drug that would help puppies survive some very deadly disease. Well, that small difference, even though it's a 2% increase in the puppy survival rate, that's important. People love puppies. I love puppies, right? And I want them to live. So it depends on your context, right? Large differences usually are important, usually are significant in real life, in practice. Small differences usually are not, but that's not always the case. It depends on the context of the situation. And that means you as a student are going to have to make judgment calls. And that's okay. Being able to make judgments and make critical decisions is important to all of us. But it's especially important to know that just because you rejected H naught doesn't mean that what you came up with is really a big deal. It might be, but it might not be. So you have to do that based on context, not based on necessarily rejecting of the H naught. But rejection of H naught helps, that's for sure. You definitely want to reject your H naught if you can. But there's more going on in real life than just rejection of H naught.